This week we're thinking about harvest, we're thinking about sharing, we're thinking about looking after each other, what that means, and I wanted to spend a bit of time thinking about what poverty can look like in the countryside in a rural setting as opposed to an urban setting, and how that might seem a strange thing if people in an urban setting think everybody in the countryside has money. And I just wanted to spend some time reflecting on what rural poverty can look like, and it can look like different things. So some people who are living in rural poverty may live in a house which is worth a lot of money. The house could be worth £1 million, but they might have a huge mortgage, which circumstances have changed and they can't afford to sell, or they can't afford to move. It may be that they have inherited a house which has gone up hugely in price since they inherited a family house. So it does not mean that necessarily if someone is living in an expensive house that they have money to spend on the basics. It doesn't mean that at all. One of the other things which is really important for people in rural communities is that they keep their car on the road, especially if they need to be able to get to work. So in rural communities, people will spend money on getting their car repaired because it's impossible for them to go to work without a car. So they will spend money on the car over fuel, over heating and over food, because actually for them to be able to sustain themselves, they need to be able to get about. And people may live in this lovely place in a really house which would be viewed as really expensive, but they may have nothing in their bank account or in their purse. Delivering food parcels in that situation, getting a referral to a food bank, especially if you can do that in a way which doesn't involve them having to travel, can be really important. Are there mechanisms in place so that a food bank parcel could be delivered in a rural setting, or that people could be helped to go and collect food bank parcels if they need that? How can we keep an eye out for that? How can we refer people? What can we think about for that? Also, what does that look like? How can we work out who might be struggling and who isn't struggling? I mean, there's all the standard things like encouraging people to apply for free school meals if they've got children and so on. But what does it look like for us as a rural community church to be able to say to people, heard you're struggling, this might help. What can we do to help? How can we build relationships with people so that if we need to, we can make that approach? And even if we sometimes just have in the past just turned up with a bag of food, to say, I have this and I think you could do with it. I hope you might be able to use it. What does that look like? People who live in really big, expensive houses may not actually have the day-to-day means to put food on the table. To begin Harvest Thought for the week, I'd really like to start by saying something about farmers and about farming and how underappreciated farmers often are. I'm not going to talk mainly about farming, I'm going to talk about sharing, but I wanted to start by saying I in no way underappreciate what farmers do. Farming is a really difficult, lonely, complex, stressful job. And I think we need to, at harvest time, always appreciate what our farmers do, because there's no point in talking about sharing if we don't have anything to share. So I'd just like to start by saying thank you to everyone who farms the food that we eat. The passage that we're using for our harvest readings is from John 6, finishing up with verse 35, where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And Jesus does talk about manna in this little bit before that as well. He talks about the manna coming down from heaven to feed people. One of the really interesting things about manna is it can't be monetized. It's impossible to monetize manna. You can't store more than you need, so you can't sell it. You can gather what you need and you can eat it that day, but you can't keep it and sell it. So that's a really important aspect of what manna is, and manna is equally available to everybody. And if we wanted to know something about what food is and what God thinks about food, I think that's a good place to start. When we come up to Jesus saying, I am the bread of life, it follows on from the bits where he is talking about after the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus is saying, I'm not here to give you physical food, although he has just done. He has just produced food for more than 5,000 people, and they count the men, so they didn't count the women and the children, and I guess even the little boy whose packed lunch they had to share out wasn't counted in the 5,000. It's always puzzled me why they needed something to share. Why did they need something to share in order to feed everybody? But I think that is to do with the whole concept of what food is about, what God thinks food is about. God thinks food is something which we should share. In the UK today, a lot of people are fed each week by food from food banks for all sorts of different reasons, to do with problems with benefits, to do with benefit arrears and debt arrears, to do with that, to do with so many different things. But it doesn't mean that people aren't still hungry. When I was a child, we didn't need food banks. People weren't struggling to eat in the same way that they are now. Many years ago, more than 20 years ago, we were involved in a project where people handed out a food parcel. At the time, maybe 20 years ago, the food parcel was worth about £2.50. We had just given a food parcel to a dad and a boy who was maybe 8 or maybe 9. The dad asked if we could open the tin of rice pudding that was in the food parcel so the boy could eat it, because he hadn't had anything to eat that day. Of course we did. Of course we opened the tin of rice pudding for that little boy, because whatever the major economic arguments are, in the end, standing right in front of us was a hungry child. And were we going to feed him? Yes, we were. Yes, we were. So when God is thinking about food, when we think about all the different instances of things about food in the Bible, what all the rules are around food, sharing seems to be a really important part of what that is about not monetizing the basics of life. So as we think about Harvest Festival, we give thanks for our farmers, but we also think about sharing the resources that we have and feeding the hungry around us. The Dibley moment of the week this week happened to me at the place where we were handing out food parcels when I was pregnant with my first child. I was enormously pregnant with my first child, so much so that I had been taken off duty by the nuns who were running the food parcel collection, and I'd been taken off duty of carrying anything, and I was on tea duty. So I was giving people cups of tea, and I think we'd had donated buns that week from a bakery that had been left over. So I was on, have a cup of tea, have a bun, which bun would you like? There was a kind of crush, a melee of people around me. I was wearing a kind of a plain blue t-shirt and a huge denim maternity dress, and I saw someone come and get a cup of tea from me, and then they came back later on when the rush had died down, and they said to me, this is run by nuns, isn't it? This place is run by nuns. And I went, yes, it's run by nuns. And he just looked at my hugely pregnant state and said, but you're, I went, oh no, but I'm not a nun. I'm here working with them, but I am not a nun. And he went away slightly less confused about why a hugely pregnant person had given him tea and a bun at the convent. Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week where you are able to share the goodness of God.